My needle drops. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new King Krule album, 6 Feet Beneath the Moon. Quickly, before I get into this review, I want to mention something in my last review. I feel like I need to respond. There was just a bit of back and forth with me and just a few other people. And essentially, I was wearing a really good shirt in that video. It's right over there. Display it. Display the shirt. Display it! So yeah, it's yellow, black, kind of flannel pattern. I really love it. It's really becoming one of my new favorite shirts, and I thank those who commented on it. King Krule is a singer-songwriter based out of the UK. This is his first album, first full-length album, under this name of his. He changed his name at about end of 2010, beginning of 2011, when he signed to True Panther Sounds. Before then, he was known as Zoo Kid, had some Bandcamp music up that was grabbing a lot of buzz. Eventually, he put out an EP on True Panther Sounds that I reviewed. Enjoyed quite a bit. I felt like some of the songs on this thing were a little half-baked. I also wish it were longer. Above all things that were presented on this EP, I really dug King Krule's aesthetic with the bare-bones instrumentation, the really sharp reverb guitar, and his voice. Oh, his voice. This dude is a low-toned crooner, and I love singers like that. But more than most people that sing in this register, he makes music that just is sharp, it's bright, it's stark. King Krule instrumentally tends to run a little minimal, and even when he does have some more backing instrumentation, he usually leaves it so spacious that there's just a lot of room around everything. But it feels like King Krule tries to take this very little amount of instrumentation and make it as loud and as expressive as possible with these guitar strumming patterns that emphasize these just really tiny, sharp upstrokes. He's just really fluid with these strumming patterns, and his vocals, which are just really emotive, eccentric, loud, and raw, yelling a lot of the time. I wouldn't say screaming, but he does just have some force to the way that he sings, to the point where he loses control of his pitch and really his composure. Part of what makes this album so good and so entertaining is that few artists are this early in their career and have such a defined sound. And on top of that, it helps that King Krule has sharpened his songwriting chops up a little bit. He was able to effectively build up excitement for this album with some really good singles to drop before this thing. The song Rock Bottom, which unfortunately does not make it onto this LP's track list. It's a shame. Very good song. Would have added to this thing, in my opinion. But the song Easy Easy, which kicks this album off, from the moment the guitar strumming pattern comes in and King Krule sings, the same old Bobby, same old beat, I'm just hooked. That thick accent, that voice, the vivid lyricism that's coming through with the storytelling, and even when he just loses control of his voice in the chorus and just wails on these guitar chords, it's such an explosive point in the song, and still, with just those vocals and those guitars, it feels incredibly powerful. It's like I'm listening to some sort of intimate performance and he's just plugged an electric guitar into a small amp and is playing in a chapel or in a stone underpass underneath a downtown London bridge. It's a great track to me, though I don't think it's necessarily going to be for everybody because of King Krule's voice. It's a bit of an acquired taste. However, if this track does not turn you off, I would say just continue on. If you are into this track, though, there are still some questions that are worth asking. Will King Krule stay so minimal and so simple that the entire album will sound essentially the same? Will he be able to come through with a diverse LP for the 50 minutes that this thing lasts? And I don't really feel like he runs into those problems per se. King Krule does change things up instrumentally from track to track, pairing his vocals with either guitar, synthesizers, some loop drum beats, some background vocals from himself, or even a little bit of piano. And there's kind of a fresh approach in how he brings these vintage pop and rock aesthetics together with some subtle trip hop and hip hop beats. There are moments where it kind of feels like he's doing a little spoken word / rapping. And I love the fact that he's able to incorporate some of these older sounds but not have this album feeling like a throwback or some kind of pointless tribute to an essentially dead musical movement. However, what I think is going to grab people even more than the genre labels for this album album are the emotions of this album. This thing is such a drag. However, this sad and kind of wild demeanor can only go so far if the songs aren't great all the way through, because there were tracks on this thing that had me wondering whether or not they needed to be here, if this LP really needed to be 50 minutes long. There are a handful of tracks on this thing that don't do too much for me, like the track 4 and 2, which for all of its instrumentation, the loop drum beats and the watery synthesizers, some sound effects, and these really noodly guitar lines that play throughout the track, there's not really a solid tune coming out of any of it. And I like King Krule's voice over the track, but it just kind of feels like vocally he is just wandering. This track to me feels like really half of a track stretched out to 3 minutes long. And I feel pretty much the same way about the track Ceiling and Baby Blue. Meanwhile, The Crocodile and Neptune Estate, two tracks on here that aren't terrible, but they don't really feel like they need to be 5 minutes long. Again, we kind of have a case of King Krule stretching out ideas that don't really stay interesting for the duration of the song. And the only changes, the only significant changes he's bringing throughout the track is that he's just going wild on his vocals. Though I will say the instrumental to Neptune Estate is one of my favorite instrumentals off of this LP, with its awesome, swelling, soulful horns. I gotta say my initial listens to this LP were pretty exciting. I was actually really thrilled to get through this album the first few times, certainly because of all of the talent that's clearly on display with King Krule's just very unique voice, his poeticism, his sound and his production, his blend of influences, all positives for him, but his vocals really started to wear thin for me on the more musically vague tracks. Still, there are some fantastic songs on this LP, like Borderline, the second track off of this thing. I love the way that King Krule uses these meandering vocal lines on the verses and contrasts them with a beautifully melodic hook that just like takes my breath away every time I listen to it, with the way it just kind of floats up with these just ethereal tones in the background on top of his skipping guitar rhythms. And the song A Lizard State may be my favorite track on here. I love the fact that King Krule lands on top of a really fiery horn riff and a great horn solo too on this track with some tight, intense drumming. I think in the future it might be fantastic to hear him write more concise songs like this and do it over a full band. The last couple songs on this LP are beautiful ballads, in my opinion, really kind of bring that dreary edge home for this thing. Overall, I really dug on this LP. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on it. But if you've given this King Krule album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that is about it. Only the strong subscribe. All mistakes were intentional. I want to give a shout out to JONAH, Anthony Fantano, King Krule, 6 Feet Beneath the Moon, Forever.